Why would one of the strongest men in the Mahabharata walk away from Kurukshetra just when the world was moving toward war? Balarama had power, lineage, and influence. He was Krishna's brother. He was respected by kings. He had trained great warriors with the mace. And yet, when the great battle came, Balarama did not take a side. That absence is not a footnote. It is one of the epic's sharpest questions about duty and power. That contrast with Krishna is what makes the story so powerful. Krishna enters the crisis fully. He counsels, strategizes, and reshapes the war without lifting a weapon. Balarama does the opposite. He steps away. So this is not just a tale about one man avoiding bloodshed. It is about two brothers responding differently to the same moral catastrophe, and forcing us to ask whether distance can sometimes look principled while still remaining incomplete. The problem becomes even deeper once we remember who Balarama was to the war's key fighters. He was linked to both sides, and especially to Bhima and Duryodhana through the art of mace combat. He knew their strengths. He knew their tempers. He knew that if the war narrowed to a duel between them, it would not be abstract politics anymore. It would become personal, technical, and painfully intimate. So the real hook is this. Was Balarama's absence wisdom, weakness, or a different kind of dharma? Did he step away because he saw both sides as bound for ruin? Because his loyalties were split? Or because some wars become so morally damaged that joining them only deepens the stain? The Mahabharata leaves room for all of those questions, and that is exactly why his choice still matters. And the story does not end with his departure. Balarama later returns at the most explosive possible moment, the final mace duel between Bhima and Duryodhana. That return changes everything, because it proves he was never emotionally absent from the war. He tried to leave the battlefield, but the battlefield eventually came back to the very discipline he had taught. That is where neutrality becomes hardest to defend. Balarama is not detached from the story. He is woven into it. He belongs to the same larger world as Krishna and the Pandavas, yet he does not see the crisis through exactly the same lens. That difference matters because the Mahabharata is full of characters who know the facts of injustice but still stand in relationships too tangled for easy action. Balarama's neutrality begins there, in the pain of divided belonging. His bond with Duryodhana is especially important. Duryodhana is not just another Kaurava prince to him. He is a student, a mace fighter shaped under Balarama's eye. Teachers know their students in a different way than allies do. They understand not only what those students have done, but what disciplines, gifts, and weaknesses live inside their bodies. To see such a student walk into annihilation is not politically simple. And Bhima matters just as much. He is not neutral material. Bhima is force, hunger, both, and consequence. If Balarama favored Duryodhana's technique, he still knew Bhima's terrifying will. That means his neutrality is not born from distance alone. It is born from witnessing greatness on both sides, and perhaps from realizing that once these men collide inside a total war, fairness itself may not survive the collision intact. This is why taking one side would have meant more than making a military choice. It would have meant publicly placing one student, one bond, and one conception of fairness above another. Balarama may have judged that impossible. But the Mahabharata pushes us further. When ties are divided and both sides contain people you value, is stepping back morally serious, or is it a way to avoid the cost of judgment itself? That is also what makes his difference from Krishna so illuminating. Krishna accepts that divided relationships do not remove the need for decision. Balarama seems to believe that once those relationships are too entangled, decision itself may become corrupting. The epic does not settle that argument cheaply. It lets both brothers stand as real possibilities, and then tests Balarama's position against the war's final outcome. Balarama does not merely stay home. He chooses pilgrimage. That detail matters because pilgrimage is not passive idleness. It is movement away from contamination, a search for cleaner ground, a way of placing oneself before sacred order instead of political fury. In that sense, Balarama is not simply avoiding violence. He is trying to answer violence with another form of discipline. The pilgrimage also tells us something about Balarama's values. He is associated with strength, agriculture, bodily force, and earthbound stability. The war, by contrast, becomes a vast machine of oath, strategy, deception, and civilizational breakdown. To leave it for sacred waters is to make a statement. Not all power has to prove itself inside the battlefield. Some power refuses the battlefield's claim to ultimate authority. But the pilgrimage is not a full answer, and the epic knows it. You can leave the field, yet still be followed by what the field means. Balarama's body travels elsewhere, but his connections remain behind him. Bhima is still there. Duryodhana is still there. Krishna is still there. That is why his neutrality feels serious, but never fully settled. Sacred distance does not erase responsibility so easily. This is where the story becomes useful for modern life. Many people want a position beyond conflict, a higher place from which they do not have to dirty themselves with faction, compromise, or moral mess. Sometimes that distance is wise. Sometimes it preserves sanity. But sometimes it hides the fear of choosing. Balarama's pilgrimage forces us to ask which kind of distance we are actually practicing when crisis becomes unbearable. And the Mahabharata answers that question in its own severe way. Balarama's withdrawal lasts only until the story reaches the very contest that binds him most personally. The war reduces itself at last to Bhima and Duryodhana with maces in hand. At that point, the teacher cannot stay gone. He returns, and the return exposes the limit of his earlier escape. Balarama returns when the war has burned itself down to something he understands in his bones, Gata Yada, the discipline of the mace. This is no longer a vast strategic war beyond one teacher's reach. It is a contest between two men he knows, inside a martial code he helped shape. That is why he comes back. The war has finally narrowed to the exact point where his neutrality can no longer remain abstract. And what he sees is both magnificent and doomed. Duryodhana's form, balance, and training are extraordinary. Bhima's force, stamina, and vow-driven ferocity are overwhelming. For Balarama, this duel is not just the war's last fight. It is the collision of discipline and oath, art and rage, method and long memory. In such a contest, rules matter more than ever precisely because the emotions involved are already too dangerous. This is where many readers feel his real preference. Balarama is often portrayed as more sympathetic to Duryodhana's technical excellence and adherence to the code. Whether or not that sympathy is total, his response makes one thing clear. He is not standing there as a bland observer. He is measuring justice through the discipline of combat itself, and expecting the duel to honor the form that gave it meaning. Then comes the blow below the waist, the strike that ends Duryodhana and detonates Balarama's outrage. This is the core of the story. Balarama did not merely avoid Kurukshetra because he disliked war in general. He also believed some forms of combat still carried rules worth preserving. When Bhima breaks that rule, the teacher sees not just a victory, but a collapse of fairness at the very moment the duel demanded it most. Krishna's response makes the contrast between the brothers complete. Krishna sees the strike through the long chain of Duryodhana's crimes, Bhima's vow, and the war's larger moral burden. Balarama sees the duel itself and the code violated inside it. Neither view is trivial. That is why the moment remains alive. It asks whether justice in a ruined world should still obey pure form, or whether broken history eventually tears form apart. So why did Balarama stay away from Kurukshetra? In one sense, because he could not join a war where his loyalties were divided and his sense of fairness would be compromised from the beginning. In another sense, because he represented a kind of power unwilling to let itself be absorbed into total political destruction. His withdrawal was not emptiness. It was a statement about the limits of participation. But the epic also refuses to let that statement become self-congratulation. Balarama returns furious at the duel because neutrality did not make him free from consequence. The world's brokenness still reached him through his students, his brother, and the code he cherished. That is the lasting tension. You may step away from conflict, yet conflict may still reveal what your principles are worth when they re-enter your life in altered form. That is why Balarama matters so much to the Mahabharata. He is not simply the warrior who skipped the war. He is the figure who reminds us that not every strong person believes power must always prove itself in battle, and not every refusal to fight is cowardice. At the same time, his return warns that fairness defended only from a distance may arrive too late when history finally demands a verdict. The larger lesson is hard and useful. Some crises force action. Some crises expose the dignity of restraint. Wisdom lies in knowing the difference, and the Mahabharata does not hand us an easy formula. Balarama leaves us with a more unsettling truth. Even when you refuse the battlefield, you still have to answer for what kind of order, code, and relationship you are ultimately defending when the world breaks apart. So why did Balarama stay away from Kurukshetra? Because he stood at the fault line between loyalty, fairness, and power, and he chose distance rather than become one more weapon inside a ruined war. But his return at the final duel shows that no one escapes the war's moral consequences completely. If this episode helped you see the Mahabharata more deeply, like this video, subscribe to EkalavyaLearn, and turn on the bell icon to get new videos on time. Next, the final mace duel asks an even harsher question: why Bhima struck Duryodhana below the waist?